Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor, where we talk about here we talk about Catholic culture to create a Catholic society. And with us is the expert on all things, Charles Coulombe.
Oh
Welcome,
boy,
sir.
boy, that's like the late lamented Professor Irwin Corey, who was a comedian, and he was always billed as the world's greatest living authority.
Well,
Full stop. Full stop.
well, I'm pretty sure you are the greatest living authority on
Oh,
all things. That
I wouldn't go that far, but certainly if I last as long as Professor Corey did, he was still performing into his mid-90s. So
Oh wow. Okay. But
he
yeah, so we're talking about The Crown today. Uh,
yes, we are.
you watched one season, right?
I did.
Okay. And I kept up with all of the seasons because I don't know, I'm bored. No, I'm not bored.
Oh,
Um
gee, well, that's now, now. See, that is something Netflix could really use as some kind of an endorsement. The Crown. I've just kept up with it because I was bored. Connor McHugh, Chicago, Illinois.
yep,
That
that's my endorsement for The Crown. Is I'm bored, let's watch TV. I don't know.
yeah.
It's also something my mother and I watch together, so it blends some of our interests. It's like Downton Abbey.
Oh,
History and drama and that sort of thing blends it all together, and so we can enjoy something together. Uh, anyways, so the main character, obviously, for the show is Elizabeth II, but it starts pre her ascension, and we have George VI around, we have Edward VIII running around, we have the Queen Mother, or we have two Queen Mothers running around.
yeah.
Uh, who else do we have? We have Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Who else? We got. I thought this one was interesting, just because of my Downton Abbey uh interest. The Earl of Carnarvon is in the show briefly, periodically throughout the seasons, but so the place that is Downton Abbey is Highclere Castle, and the Earl of Carnarvon owns the Highclere Castle. So I just thought that'd be that's interesting. But well, who do you think? Which character do you think, or which historical figure was done the most accurately, Charles?
Well, I think they did a fairly good job, frankly, on young Elizabeth. Uh, and I also think they did a good job on George VI. He uh, he was in many ways a very sad character because, of course, he was never intended to be king, and he never wanted to be king. So when he suddenly had the job thrust in his hands, he had to play catch up and do the best he could with it. And then he gets handed a world war to play with. And he and his wife did an extraordinarily good job in what they had to do. It was interesting. There was some pressure to move the princesses to Canada where they'd be safe.
Hmm.
And the uh, the Queen Mother was asked about it during the war, and she said, "The children will never leave their mother. Their mother will not leave the king, and the king will never leave."
Yes, indeed.
And that I forget if that episode appears in The Crown, but that's actually a true story.
I don't think that is shown. I don't think they ever get into World War II itself. Uh,
World War II and the abdication crisis, of course, were a great part of what formed the Queen. And I don't think you could really understand her personality without realizing that. Uh, she was, of course, quite young when her uncle abdicated. And, to be honest, I am not amongst the legions of Edward VIII haters.
Mm-hmm.
uh, for those who are, I can only recommend you read Compton Mackenzie's The Windsor Tapestry. Easily available online at archive, Internet Archive. But nevertheless, I think that it was certainly a great tragedy, I think, for Britain that he abdicated. It certainly, as I say, was a tragedy for his brother. It was very difficult for his sister-in-law to ever forgive him. Uh, one of the most poignant scenes in my own memory was after Edward VIII and the Duke of Windsor died in '72. The funeral was televised, and it was very poignant to watch how the Queen Mother and Queen Elizabeth dealt with Mrs. Simpson, because she was obviously really broken by it. And they were actually quite comforting, which is quite the opposite of what you would have expected.
And the opposite of what the Crown really shows.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the bitterness was certainly there on both sides, I have no doubt. But um, I think by the time he died, it had been assuaged considerably. Um, I mean, they always in the Crown they always portray Edward as kind of plotting against his uncle and his niece, the way Mr. Markle and his wife do in Malibu, or her husband, or whatever it is. Anyway, the Markles.
The
Uh,
Markles.
you know, and it sadly, I don't believe it was true. You know, they like to accuse Edward VIII of being a Nazi sympathizer and this and that. Edward VIII had actually been on the Western Front during World War One and seen his chauffeur killed right in front of him. In other words, he had actually been to war. And
Yeah.
oddly enough, like many people throughout Europe, to say nothing of Britain and the Empire, he was really not keen on doing this again. There was also the fact that he was quite aware that Britain could afford to do one of two things: fight another war or maintain her empire. What she couldn't do was both,
Mm-hmm.
and she didn't. So the biggest nail in the coffin, if you will, toward the idea that Edward wanted to collaborate with the Nazis is the fact that he and the Duchess were living in France when it fell to the Germans. And if he had wanted to, it would have been the easiest thing in the world to allow himself to be captured and used. Instead, he and the Duchess went on a hair-raising trip through a collapsing France to Spain. They get through the Spanish border, they make their way to Portugal. There's a plot by the Germans to kidnap them, but they get on the battleship that takes them to the Bahamas. Did he feel a certain amount of resentment at being sent to the Bahamas? Yeah. Did he do as good a job as he could as governor of the Bahamas? Yeah. I've talked to people who lived under him at that time, and he did a good job.
Why didn't he have a significant role if he was governor of the Bahamas at one point? Why did he continue to have sort of, or why did he lose that position? And why did he sort of disappear from public view?
Well, the war was over, number one. And number two, they had to give him something to do during wartime, and that's what they gave him. And number two, there was still, I think, on both sides, a certain amount of bitterness, to be sure. The other problem is that what do you do with a former king?
You're not supposed to have
Especially,
any of those.
well, you know, let's put it this way. In a republic that's deposed its monarch, the heir to the throne can, and they very often do, play some sort of role. With a reigning monarch and a former king hanging around, What do you do with that? It's a problem.
Mhm.
And and he certainly, I must say that both he and his wife, when they became purely social, shall we say, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. They would just maintain their social life, and that was it. Although curiously, in 1950, they were invited to New Orleans for Mardi Gras, and I don't know if you know how Mardi Gras works, but basically it's run by several semi-secret groups that are called crews, spelled with a K.
Interesting.
And yeah, and the top one, not the oldest, which is the crew of Comus, but the crew of Rex. Each crew has a king.
Word from our affiliate, Bishop Sheen Rosaries. You've probably worn through the chain of your cheap plastic rosary. Other rosaries simply can't stand up to the wear and tear of everyday life. Bishop Sheen rosaries are made of solid metal beads and paracord to withstand any condition and are backed with a lifetime warranty. Upgrade your rosary to a Bishop Sheen rosary made to fit your lifestyle or buy one for a friend. Each rosary sold supplies 2 weeks of food for a school kid in Uganda. You use the exclusive link down below to help support our efforts here at Plotlines. The link will take you to sheenrosaries.com. Be sure to use the code Plotlines10.
The head king, the Mardi Gras.
Yep, is the king of Rex. So the crew of Rex has a ball on Mardi Gras night in 1950, and at that ball, people are presented and you bow and curtsy in front of the king and queen of Rex. So the big question in New Orleans was, will the Duke and Duchess of Windsor bow and curtsy to the king of Rex and his consort? And this was a question that agitated New Orleans society for weeks. What's going to happen? What are they going to do? Well, the great night comes. It's Mardi Gras night. The Duke and Duchess are in the receiving line. They go up, and the Duke bows, and the Duchess curtsies in front of the King and Queen of Rex.
Okay.
So, yeah, they solved that issue pretty well. But it took a long, long time for the bitterness engendered because both sides felt they'd been mistreated. Edward felt A, that monies had been denied him that had been promised, and B, that he wasn't given any kind of official role. He didn't pretty much, being governor of the Bahamas wasn't great, but it was better than nothing. And he resented not getting anything official after that. He wanted something to do, and he didn't get it. On the other hand, the bitterness that the abdication had engendered and that Mrs. Simpson herself had engendered took a very long time to soften. Interestingly enough, Prince Charles, when he was quite a young man, got to know his uncle better. And I understand that was part of the slow reconciliation.
In The Crown, they're mostly Prince Charles and Edward VIII are often portrayed as the villains of the show.
Well, that's because the show is stupid. Stupid is such an important quality of modern life today that I really think it requires definition. What is stupidity? I'll tell you. It is the marriage of ignorance and arrogance, the two together. See, if you're ignorant but humble, you can learn. If you're brilliant but arrogant, well, it's annoying, but you've got a leg to stand on. If you are in high positions today, in either government, media, or academia, you've got a better than even chance of being stupid in that sense. So, yeah, I mean, The Crown, if you get your history from TV, you might as well plan your future on fortune cookies.
Well, that's why we're here to listen to truth.
Well, now you're getting it. As far as Prince Charles being a villain, nothing could be further from the truth. I've done something that very few modern people do when trying to find out about somebody. I've actually read what he writes.
How could you?
I know it's a betrayal of everything we hold dear as Americans.
I thought you were supposed to like look at the person, hear what other people say, and then condemn them on the spot.
You know, that's absolutely true. And everyone who does that would be wise to put both fingers in their noses and blow hard. But yeah, I mean, that's the way morons do things. And I think being a moron is a good thing, really. If it wasn't, we wouldn't be ruled by them in our country. But anyway, moving along, let's not attack our senile president and his questionable vice president. We don't want to make ourselves look bad in front of the BRITS.
Ha 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 ha.
Yeah. Well, they do their best. See, the thing is,
That's what
they
our
have
vice president would do.
yeah, oh, I'm sure she would. And this is the time to do it. Now is the time. The time is now to do what we're doing. We need to do it now. And so as we do it now, this we'll find that now is the time when doing it is what we should be doing.
So we should be doing it. That's what I'm getting from this.
Well, we should be doing it now because now is the time to do it. If
Yes.
indeed we're going to do it at all, which we probably should, now being the time.
Okay, so now let's talk about Elizabeth II.
Oh, all right. Let's move along. Um,
Her and Prince Philip are an interesting dynamic, at least from the show. Sort of they treat him Philip like a lost puppy, and they treat her as forever enthralled by him, but also always feeling always feeling lesser, kind of, not to him specifically, but just in general. She always seems to think of herself as lower, at least when she's younger.
well,
Less intelligent, less worthy of attention, that sort of thing. She always thinks she's second rate to Margaret, even though she doesn't want to say that. She doesn't say it, but she plays the part, sort of.
well, frankly, unlike the Netflix producers who grew up with the Queen and Margaret, and thus know by having lived with them intimately, I'm not in a position to comment on that since I wasn't there, unlike the Netflix producers.
Yeah, that's the great thing. It's just like, how in the world are these scenes being portrayed? It's like no one was there who would say it or what happened.
Well, yeah, but see, Netflix knows.
Oh,
Even then, they were watching everyone through the port.
okay. To be honest,
They knew. What is true is that Philip is how do I put it? Philip was a Greek royal of a family that had been deposed repeatedly, and he was the younger son of that family, or the son of a younger son. His parents did not get along with each other. His father died. His mother became a nun, a Greek Orthodox nun. So, although he was a prince of Greece and Denmark by birth, he did not, he was not raised in wonderful circumstances. He was a sailor and kind of an interesting guy in that area, and she was certainly very much in love with him. When he died last year, I really didn't think she was going to last last much longer. I'm very happy she lived to see her platinum jubilee, but I didn't think she was going to manage because he really was her strong right arm, And what is amazing about the real Elizabeth II is that above all, she represented continuity in a period of horrendous change. She inherited a situation wherein her own opinions could mean absolutely nothing. She had a constitution, which, of course, was imposed in 1688, but she ruled by virtue of that constitution. In other words, were it not for the current political arrangements, she would not be queen.
Yeah.
So she had to do what she could with what she had. The only, people are today, they often jump up and down, and especially in the States, why didn't she veto the abortion bill? Why didn't she do this? Why didn't she do that? Well, the plain truth is she couldn't. No British monarch has vetoed a bill since 1708.
I thought there was something in the early 1900s, or was that the House of Lords?
That was the House of Lords,
Oh,
and
okay.
there, what happened was that, we'll see. In those days, the House of Lords, a hereditary chamber. Then it's primarily not now. It's filled with all sorts of political hacks and scumbags that get manage to pay enough.
Now it's just stupid.
No, it's just stupid, like everything else. There are still, I think, 97 or maybe fewer hereditary lords elected from their total number, but the rest are just political appointees for life. So in 1911, though, except for the Anglican bishops, they were all hereditary. And the House of Lords, although they could no longer initiate bills that had fallen out of use, they could still stop them. They could veto them. And they did. The Lords were usually overwhelmingly Tory conservatives. So a Liberal government was very unhappy with them when they knocked down both the Home Rule for Ireland bill and the budget bill. They went to the country, they had new elections, and they had almost exactly the same number of seats in the Commons as before. So it didn't resolve anything. Well, then they wanted the Lords to surrender their equality with the Commons.
How could they do that? It's equality. Come on.
I don't think it was put quite the way I'm putting it.
I know.
But
That's you're very clever.
Well, I was trained by morons, so I know how morons talk. I know what they say.
You know how to beat the morons.
I don't know about beating them, but they're still running the show. But
Well,
I accept them for what they are. And
I mean, in an argument, not like.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's pretty easy. You just get real loud, really stupid, real outraged. And, you look the other person in the eye and you say, well, you just think that way because of where you were born. Yeah, I mean, you've got to combine the intelligence of a flea with the maturity of a 3-year-old. But I digress. So, and my apologies to all 3-year-olds and fleas, especially to Flea, the head singer of, gosh, I can't even think of their name now.
Well, either way, fleas and 3-year-olds are a big percentage of the listeners of Plotlines. I'm pretty sure.
They may well be. So I apologize deeply, and of course I didn't mean to upset you if I did. But no, so the thing was that the Prime Minister Asquith went to King Edward VII and said, if the Lords will not surrender their powers, we'd like you to create enough Lords to pack the House. So, they'll do it.
So the Supreme Court, it's like backing the Supreme Court.
Precisely.
Today. Interesting.
Precisely. And Edward VII said, no, I'm not doing that. You work it out with them or forget it. So luckily for Asquith, Edward VII died not long after. And his son, George V, became king, the grandfather of Queen Elizabeth, the father of George VI and Edward VIII. He became king in 1910 and was very young and very inexperienced, and he agreed to do what his father would not do. So rather than have the 500 or whatever number of lords they would have to make, the conservative peers backed down, and the so-called Reform Act of 1911 was passed. That's what happened.
Great. That's tremendous.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was, you see, the problem with what that ended up doing was meaning that whoever was the party in power could do anything they wanted. And that's been the case from that day to this. In other words, One of the important things about the House of Lords was that it acted as a check and a balance upon the power of the majority of the House of Commons.
Yeah.
Now, one way that they were able to push this was the idea, well, the myth of mass democracy. The Commons is the people's house. So that's where they represent the voice of the people. Well, we know how true that is they put on their masks and hide out in their rooms. The truth is, of course, that politicians are people who do things that most of us are incapable or unwilling to do, like artists or like athletes, but they have to have a firm leash. The best leash historically for such creatures have been kings and or hereditary houses. Keep them from getting too wild. But
Yeah.
the whole point of modern governance is that the politicians run everything. And the reason why in countries like Australia and Canada and New Zealand they resent the monarchy so much is the idea that the very highest rank, head of state, sovereign, can't be one of them. That's very upsetting. I want to be president like in the US. Well, you can't. You can be prime minister. You can still run the show. You can still run the country into the ground. If you're the prime minister of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, you can turn your country into a prison camp, as they did. You can do all that. You've got total power under heaven and earth.
I mean, they were originally a prison colony, so what do you want from them?
Australia was.
The
other two were not. Canada was never a prison colony. Neither was New Zealand.
Are you sure? Just kidding.
Yes. Even if Justin Trudeau belongs in prison, it was not a prison colony.
I think he's made it a prison colony.
Oh, he has. What a silly goofus. Anyway, I must say that, when I was a kid,
you were young once?
I was actually born the very day John F. Kennedy was elected. It's true.
Right.
And at that time, Queen Elizabeth was served as prime minister by, well, let's see, in London, I guess it was Alec Douglas-Home. In Ottawa, it was the great Diefenbaker. Menzies in Australia. I forget the man in New Zealand. But these were really impressive figures. Now look at our last prime ministers. Little Justin Trudeau in Canada, the chick in New Zealand. I mean, what a bunch of morons.
They're all chicks in my perspective.
Well, certainly Justine looks like one, but they're just, she had to go through all that. She had to put up with some of the stupidest people in power ever.
Well, the way they always portray it is that it is if she's gotten along with all of them, like that she liked them. Like she kept liking every prime minister pretty much, except for Margaret Thatcher. That's the only one they like to say she didn't like.
Well, that's because it's the one they don't like, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. That's just like how is the one prime minister that they don't like the one she doesn't like?
Oddly enough. And of course, it may well be that there was a certain amount of rivalry, two women in a house.
Yeah, I think that's a line from The Crown is like Philip says that, how ridiculous it is to have two women running the country. Everything's going to fall apart.
Well, it didn't, thankfully. When she became prime minister, people asked me what I thought of Britain having a lady prime minister. And my response was that from what I could see, she was the strongest man in England.
Yeah, though she had, this is just from The Crown, corrupting probably, but she seemed very much more what's the word? She seemed focused on getting rid of hierarchies in regarding birth, I guess.
Regarding birth? Well, no,
like
not really.
No? Okay. Or she seemed like she didn't like people who were born of a higher status.
Well, that may well be. She was very middle class. And when you consider what some of the people of higher status have done for Britain recently, or not, but of course, it was Tony Blair that got rid of the Lords, not Margaret Thatcher.
When you say get rid of the Lords, what do you mean by that?
Well, up until 1963, the vast majority of the Lords were hereditary. In 63, they passed a new act which provided for the appointment of life peerages, meaning some schmuck, he's eaten at the public trough for X number of years. He wipes the food off his face, and they make him Lord Moron of Nitwit. But his children will not inherit. So he sits in Parliament in all his glory. And from 1963 on, they appointed very few hereditary peers. For that, before, if you were made a peer, your children would inherit. Now, of course, as you can imagine, that also forced people to kind of think a little bit about who they were appointing, because you'd be dealing with the results of this appointment for a long time. Unfortunately, then is now the honor system, of which the appointment of peerages was part. The system of honors, the appointment of peers, baronets, knights, etc., was already primarily in the hands of the government. That's why, when people get upset about the Queen making this one or that one a knight or something, what they don't realize is that there are only 3 orders that she actually controls: the Garter, the Thistle, and the Order of Merit. Everything else, that comes directly from the Prime Minister. So,
Great.
and so every few years, there'll be a scandal breaking out about honors for sale. And then they'll come up with all sorts of interesting ideas as to how to improve the honor system, reform it, get the cronyism out, blah, 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 blah.
So really, there's only 3 good orders, or 3 orders of worth, I guess, of
Well,
some
I wouldn't
value.
say that, because a lot of decent people still get the other honors.
Okay.
But if you want to see, if for comparison's sake, when the honors lists come out at New Year's and the King's birthday, compare the different people getting them. Inevitably, the people that the Queen then or the King now appoint of their own are a much better sort of people. And by that, I don't mean necessarily noblemen or wealthy. I mean people who've actually done things for the community. Soldiers, charity workers, are, real people, not political simulacra. There's a word for you.
No, what is it?
Well, a simulacrum, singular, is an imitation.
Okay.
So a simulacrum of a human being is an imitation human being, not a real one.
Yes, Kamala Harris does a job of trying to be one.
Yeah, she'd be a simulacrum of a lady vice president, sure.
I think of a person.
That could be too.
She's barely human.
But you take a whole bunch of the White House today, and they are simulacra in the plural.
Okay.
So, see, you're learning English as well as history. It's a great deal.
I know. I can't believe the things we do here on Plotlines. Learning English and history. Yeah. Interesting. I did a poll. I did a poll on Twitter today, or yesterday and today, and then on YouTube as well. It was basically, what's your favorite subject that's covered on Plotlines? I don't know if you saw it. Then you didn't vote in it. How could you? Anyways, it's interesting. On YouTube, people voted history, basically. And on Twitter, they voted general Catholic culture.
Well, that's interesting. You've got 2 very different constituencies.
Yes, it's interesting. I think it makes some sense. I think it makes sense that people on Twitter were more interested in that. But yeah, anyway, so the first Prime Minister of Queen Elizabeth is Winston Churchill. Quite a Prime Minister to start with.
Yeah, I'll say.
Can you do an impersonation for us?
I have never promised anything but blood, tears, toil, and sweat.
What about transgender, Winston Churchill?
Oh, transgender Winston Churchill. My dear young thing, I have arrived here to this locker room for young ladies' sports. Being a young lady myself, I am ready to practice with the rest of you. Where do we disrobe? Mom!
Oh,
Where may I place my cigar?
that will never get old. Well, the cigar would be banned anyways.
How can you do this? I am Winston Churchill, young female athlete.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it would be brought back if Churchill was still alive and became transgender. I think they might bring back smoking in locker rooms and anywhere. I think that would become the big new thing.
Well, the truth is, actually, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I do have a theory about why smoking has become the bête noire of the bourgeoisie that rule us.
Well, there's a lot of smoking in the show, so I think it's worthwhile.
Well, so I'm always in favor of smoking, but I think the reason why it is that ever since the 90s, the 80s, 90s, zeros, and teens, there's been this moral outrage against it, is because as a Puritan society, a puritanical society, that is nevertheless very wildly depraved, the puritanical impulse has to be directed somewhere. Now, it can't be directed
puritanical about.
Exactly. It can't be directed against real sin because we've embraced that. We've made it what we are. So what do? Well, smoking.
Yeah. I mean, parents
so
need something to do.
Yes, parents need something to do. Government needs something to lecture about.
No,
Academia,
Karens.
Them too. Would you pardon me for just a moment? There's a knock at the door.
All good. Yep.
This is beginning to feel like a radio show. Hold on a sec.
And he's back.
That was Dan Devine, your Facebook friends, who sends his regards.
Oh, wonderful.
Classmate of mine. I told you it was like a radio show, Alan's Alley or something like that. Pippa McGee and Molly. Why, here's my neighbor, Bob. Hello, Bob. Well, hello, Charles. How are you? Well, I'm fine. What's going on now?
It's like Home Improvement.
Yeah, a bit like that.
Yeah.
A bit like that. So, at any rate, yeah, so where were we? The Queen, yes, well.
Churchill.
Churchill, yes, and transgender Churchill. Oh, and then, of course, the need
smoking.
The need to demonize smoking in order to feel good about ourselves, considering all the evil from bathing our hands in infants' blood, to allowing children to be abused into surgery, to profaning marriage, to murdering our young, murdering our elderly, our sick, and in the case of Canada, our poor. So a society like that drips with crap really, really needs, especially if it's puritanical, needs to focus on something it can consider evil.
And if it can't complain about transgender Winston Churchill, it's got to complain about smoking.
Young man, let me tell you something. That young girl over there is rather cute. I say so as another young woman just like her. Mom.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, dear. President Obama would shut us down if we if we noticed anything.
If we got rid of Winston Churchill from the female bathroom.
Winnie, as we call her.
Winnie, oh. wonderful woman. Wait,
I
Winnie
am Winnie.
Who?
I am Winnie Churchill, the latest addition to this all-girls athletic team. I don't think you really know how to play the game. Nonsense. Is it cricket? Well, no, actually. Lacrosse? No. Well, what is it then? Well, it's mud wrestling. Anyway.
What sport is okay?
You've never heard of mud wrestling?
Not as a sport from a school.
Obviously, we didn't go to the same schools, but
Well, obviously,
no, we didn't have mud wrestling at my school.
with Winston Churchill.
Mud wrestling with transgender Winston Churchill and other amazing feats.
Uh,
I
but
think you'd
yeah.
have the advantage in weight. I do, especially over any other 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old girl. He could just literally wipe the mud pit with her.
Oh my. Well, okay, but Churchill as a prime minister, he's on his,
Well, that was a little bit different.
on his second second outing as prime minister. He's portrayed very feeble. He's portrayed very much like he's too old for this sort of thing.
Well, that's actually quite true. I mean, he really was sort of past his best by date at that point. But he nevertheless, he soldiered on. He did his best. Of course, the problem was the fellow who would be his successor, Anthony Eden, was a nice man, but not that smart.
He does seem kind of dumb and portrayed.
Well,
in the show.
and he made the biggest mistake any ally of the United States can ever make.
What was that?
He trusted the United States.
Oh yes, yeah.
I mean, do you remember Peanuts with Lucy and Charlie Brown?
No. Oh wait. Are you just talking about the holding the football?
Yes, I am.
Yes. Okay. Now, yes, I never watched Peanuts, but very much. But I know what you're talking about.
Well, we are the perpetual Lucy the football holder, and our allies, they never catch on.
Well, they have no choice.
Well, that does make it a little different. Charlie Brown could say no, though he never does. They they just keep coming back for Mo.
Our allies are basically addicted.
Yeah, well, partly the fact that we fund them. And thanks to us, they don't really have to pay for their own defense. So that's something.
Yes. And we have to pay for everyone else's defense. Wonderful.
Well, yeah, but at least we've transgenderized it. So that's something to be happy about.
Transgender military defense.
Oh, yes, indeed. Oh,
What, wasn't there a big complaint about the Ukrainians forcing their transgender to continue fighting, or they couldn't leave or something like that because
they couldn't leave. They couldn't leave. But see, you can't have it all ways you want. I mean, right now, the American Legion endorsed last summer. Although we don't have the draft, we do have the selective service system, and you've got to, if you're an able-bodied young man, you've got to, fill out the sheet in case you ever have the draft again.
Mm-hmm.
So the American Legion passed a resolution calling for women and transgenders to also be forced to do so.
Okay.
Well, it is a truly decadent and worthless society that makes its women fight its wars.
Well, it's also like, who wants transgender soldiers?
Only the morons that rule the country.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
So stupid. We're talking about people who want to lower the physical requirements for the SEALs so that women can participate. Okay, my dear little morons, my little munchkins of stupidity.
Munchkins.
Mental and moral munchkins. I realize you're in charge, so you're not going to listen, but the SEALs do not exist as a sort of equality thing. The SEALs are there to do very specific missions, and if you lower their requirements so that women can participate, you're going to end up with a lot of dead SEALs and a lot of dead people on the other end of whatever it is they're trying to do or rescue.
See, the problem is they'd be unhappy if the SEALs were animals.
Well, indeed. If they were,
yeah, then they'd be like, how could you get their SEALs killed? But instead, when it's humans, they're like, yeah, it's fine.
Well, especially because you'll notice that Hunter Biden never served in the armed forces, and neither did Trump's kids. You see, the leadership's children, especially their sons, no longer serve in the armed forces. Their parents, whether it be Nancy Pelosi or her Republican opposite number, feed at the public trough, but their children don't get offered up as the prize for playing.
Charles III didn't serve in the army, did he?
Of course he did.
Oh, he did. Okay. What so army, navy, or what?
All at once. He served in several different things. And of course his brother, Prince Andrew, who shall we say has certain problems of his own. Nevertheless, he played a very heroic role in the Falklands.
That is
Even
not gone into at all in the in the TV show.
oh no, I guess it wouldn't be. It would be important to them. They have a particular image they're trying to get across, and that's all that matters.
Yeah. I mean, literally, it's just you know,
Is
in that area, they just wanted to have Margaret Thatcher and Queen Elizabeth do like, you know, be focused on purely because they're women. Like, they don't want to focus on anybody else, really.
I wonder who's going to play Meghan when the crown gets there. Maybe Meghan herself.
Yeah, that's what I said. That'd be great.
She
Can
could
she
play
just be?
herself.
Can she be as horrible as she actually is?
No, I think a role she was born to play.
Herself, yes.
And then, and of course, they could have Prince Harry play himself.
Yeah, I mean, they need jobs and they work for Netflix.
Well, see, that's the thing, and
It's perfect.
one of the things that is being discussed right now, because they're dumping on the royal family beautifully. See, the problem with this sort of stuff is that nobody would give tuppence for them if they weren't royals.
True.
And the problem, is the same with Princess Diana. If she'd been an American chick, nobody would have ever heard of her.
When's the royal family gonna get red pilled though? That's what I want to know.
Well, it'll be a bad day for them when they do, because they're surrounded by, you guessed it, morons.
Is the people sort of in sort of the I don't even know what the people that work for the royal family directly.
The court.
The court, yeah. With the court, is the court full of morons too?
Not as moronic as the politicians.
There are degrees of moronic.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're and some of them are quite bright. But
Okay.
you got to bear in mind that they exist at the behest of the morons. All you would need is a prime minister to say we're establishing a republic, and they could do it.
Would the people go along with it?
Well, it depends on how stupid they are.
But they're really wait, the people or the prime minister? Because the prime
people.
minister could really mess it up by being really stupid about it.
Yes,
like
he could.
like
Tony Blair is a case in point.
Yeah.
He did a lot to mess up Britain. The terrible things he did to the British Constitution, no Tory since has repaired.
It seems like Blair. I don't really know much about him, but it does seem like from just what I've gathered over the course of listening to more British voices, it seems like he's the one everyone blames for everything, in the sense that
deservedly.
Okay.
He was a real piece of garbage in
Bush.
In the best sense of that term. He mangled the British Constitution. See, here's the problem. You see this in Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and you see it in the United States. If you're in power, you're supposed to be there as a servant of the Constitution, not its master. If you don't like the rules, great, get a real job. You know, where you've got to do something with your life instead of sucking off the vitality of the country. Get a real job. Now, they don't, because, of course, number one, they'd be incompetent in anything else, but also because it's what they're trained for, it's what they know how to do. But again, expanding the power of the political class by claiming that it's making things more democratic. Under that phrase, tons of damage has been and continues to be done to the British, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, etc. constitutions. And it's happened in our own country. I think probably the most famous version for us is that a couple of years after the House of Lords got defanged in 1911 and 1913, an amendment was passed in the United States, which made the senators who heretofore had been appointed by the state legislatures, they made them elected directly by the people of the state.
Yeah, that
Now,
happened. That happened
sorry.
around the same time the House of Lords were undermined, right?
2 years later, there was an amendment to the Constitution, I think it was the 17th Amendment, which allowed which changed the Constitution of the Senate. And as I say, prior to that time, the Senate had been appointed by the state legislatures, and the state legislatures put them in any way they wanted to. Sometimes they had a sort of election in the Senate. Sometimes they were directly appointed. They had but that was up to the state to do it. And why was that, you can ask? Well, it goes back to what our Constitution is supposed to be, a union of sovereign states with the federal government as their creation. Now, the Senate was intended to be their watchdog on that federal government. One of the reasons why prior to the Civil War you had all this stuff about slave states versus free states was because that would determine who had the control of the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens when they get rid of that and the senators are directly elected? Well, several things. Before, number one, the senators were responsible to someone, the state government, and they could get support from someone if they were pushed by, lobbyists and so forth. And who was that? Once again, the state government. So they had both support and supervision. Being directly elected by the people meant they would have neither.
Yep.
And that gave us a setup where, as we know today, we like to say, what's the word I want?
Mob rule?
You may not be a millionaire when you go into the Senate, but you will be when you leave.
Ah. The House, you do that too sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The big money in government. That's right. Where do you think Count Dracula got all his money? You're sucking the blood of the people. I'll tell you what. You really, what? What?
Just funny.
Well, I'm just saying.
Uh-huh.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine by me.
Indeed. But you know what else it did? Because the other unfortunate result of the senators being what they became, the general level of senators went down. You're not going to get a Calhoun, a Webster, or a Clay in the U.S. Senate ever again, because men like that could never have been popularly elected.
Indeed. Yeah. I mean, look at Pennsylvania.
Oh, geez. Do I have to? Plus, but wait, there's more. The unfortunate truth is that the Senate, to get into the Senate, you had to have some background in state government. So what did that mean? It meant that state government became very much more important. And you had people of ability who were keen on spending their whole lives as state legislators. Now it's just a stepping stone.
Mm-hmm.
So,
do you think Rod Blagojevich was confused when he tried to sell a Senate seat because he thought the rules were back in prior to the election of state senators? He thought, the state gets to decide. I know this one.
I don't think anybody is ever wrong in selling a Senate seat. I think that, if you can't look at President Obama, now he was the creation of the daily machine in Chicago. His only job before becoming president of these United States was as a senator, and he didn't complete his first term.
Yep.
So I always got a kick out of talking to people who have been excited to vote for him. And I said, well, let me ask you, would you vote for a maiden senator who is the creation of the daily machine in Chicago? Well, no, I would never do that. Yeah, but you did. You did
Yep.
that. But I no, see, you looked at the color of his skin rather than the content of his character.
Oh boy.
To quote a person worth quoting. Well, that's, we've gone a long way from the crown, but actually we haven't, because I've said over and over again, I've talked about the inability of the British monarch to oppose anything he or she disagrees with on the part of the government. Well, believe it or not, we played a big part in that. As I mentioned, in 1688, the Stuarts were overthrown. The oligarchs running Parliament brought in William of Orange, and the Act of Settlement was passed, which meant that from now on, Parliament was sovereign, not the monarch, and the monarch rules at Parliament's behest.
But I thought the monarch's called the sovereign.
The monarch, the sovereign, they have the name, but that's all they got. So that was 1688, but nevertheless, the king, the monarch, the queen, the sovereign, still had a certain amount of pull. And this was particularly apparent in Queen Anne, the last Stuart to sit on the throne of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Queen Anne vetoed several bills. She was the last to refuse the royal assent. Because what happened was that when she died, her younger brother, who was nevertheless the rightful heir, was once again cheesed out. Although this led to several Jacobite risings Scotland and England, George I, the Elector of Hanover. Now, George couldn't speak any English. So this was a bit of a problem for him. He couldn't preside over cabinet meetings the way Queen Anne had done. And so, under George I and under his more English-speaking, but still not really interested son, George II, the prime ministry became what it is now, precisely because they weren't paying attention, as you might say. But somebody had to run the show. And then George II's grandson, George III, became king. Well, George III was the first of the Hanoverians whose first language was English. And as he said in his coronation speech, I am the first of my line to glory in the name of Britain. And he was very proud of being an English speaker.
That's kind of
Yeah, to be
embarrassing,
honest,
though.
What's that?
That's slightly embarrassing, though. Good for him, but slightly embarrassing for everyone else.
Well, they lived with it. He was actually very, very popular, even in the colonies,
Sure.
despite the best efforts of our own oligarchs. But he was faced with a big political problem. His idea was to go back not to 1688, but to the time of Queen Anne. They wanted to rule as she had ruled, which would still have been under parliamentary sovereignty and the government, but he would have had much more of a role.
Yeah. It's funny. It just reminds me of In the Crown when Churchill's talking about democracy and stuff like that. It's slightly comical to me. We're watching The Crown and the Brits are all just talking about democracy.
Well, democracy, all I can say is put on your mask and go back into your room.
Yeah, I mean, if things were that way when Churchill was around, he would have been sent off to a hospital with a mask and not be able to see any of his family.
Yep.
Before he died, and he'd still
And
probably be the prime minister.
of course, the sad thing about it all too is that now, with the passage of time, all of the fakery around it all is coming out. I remember thinking 2 years ago, I hope to God that they know what they're doing, because if they don't, there's going to be a horrible backlash. If it turns out that all of this was pointless and wasted. Anyway,
how could
I
you even
digress.
hope politicians know what they're doing?
How can I hope it?
Like,
hope springs eternal.
Yeah,
I saw Bambi.
there's no, it's not. This is not reasonable. Hope is supposed to be at least reasonable.
I saw Bambi.
What does that have to do with it?
I saw Pinocchio.
What does that have to do with anything?
I grew up on Disney films.
Yes, and
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are. When you wish upon a star, as dreamers do. Fate is kind. She'll stand up and see you through. You'll see. And so I put the same amount of hope in politicians that Jiminy Cricket would have. So there. But seriously, so what happened was that he very soon found himself in conflict with what we call historically the Whig oligarchy in Britain. And at the same time, government after government, which rose and fell as they tended to do, cabinets being what they are, they were faced with a terrible problem. The terrible problem was that after the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, the British had run up a huge tab defending the colonies against my ancestors, the French, who, of course, were much better fighters than the English colonials and would clean their clocks on a regular basis. I'm not saying that was a bad thing.
if you say so, I had a lot of revolutionary ancestors.
Well, too bad. The
Yeah, I
point
know.
is,
I feel very bad about it.
well, you've every reason to. But the what? That was supposed to be comforting. It didn't come out that way. Anyway.
Yeah, nope.
So what happens? But that with my ancestors defeated, Britain is still stuck with the bill, and the great British taxpayer is stuck having to try to pay it off. So government after government tried to come up with some way of getting the colonies to pay a symbolic amount.
And my ancestors were like, how dare you try anything?
Well, indeed. We got free defense, we got a free ride, and now you're saying we got to pay for it. Let me tell you something. A free lunch is what our country's all about.
Americans do what we want, and you pay for it.
Yes, exactly. Now you understand.
I've understood it my entire life.
Well, indeed. And for some reason, however, the I benefit, you pay whole idea didn't really come across too well for the British taxpayer. But wait, there was more. And the more was that only a small minority of colonials could vote for the assemblies that actually levied the majority of the taxes they paid.
Yeah, but do we really want people to vote?
Well, that's a whole other story. If you're going to say no taxation without representation, you better practice it first.
Yeah, but only the people we want to have representation.
Yes, I know. But you shouldn't have made the other people. I mean, you can't have it both ways. Are you going to tax them or not? If you're going to tax them, that's fine. But then you have to expect the same will happen to you.
I don't understand the problem.
Yeah, I know. It's like the old story about the African convert. The priest asked him, "Do you understand the difference between good and evil, my son?" And he says, "Oh yes, father. Evil is when my neighbor steals my cow. Good is when I steal his." No, I understand.
I'm pretty sure that also could be Poland post communism,
or Wales, or any number of places.
Wales?
Yeah, the Welsh were famous for stealing each other's cattle.
How long ago are we talking about?
Well, 14, 13, 1200s, a little while.
Oh, okay. I thought we were talking about something modern. The Welsh
No.
Back again?
Back when I was in school.
What?
In the 13, 12, 1000s.
You are quite old.
Yes, I know. With my beautiful Friedhof's blonde hair. That
Yes.
means graveyard blonde for those of us who aren't German.
Well, you're like Gandalf.
Gandalf, sometimes I feel I'm a little more like Rabadash the Ridiculous, but never mind. We'll move along.
No,
Well, he was good with animals.
no, you're more. Well, if anything, then you're Radagast, the Brown. You're a little
Oh, well.
cuckoo.
Maybe I'm one of the other two. I don't know. Or the other three, I guess.
The,
Wait a minute. No,
you're
there
not
were four.
Saruman.
No. There was Gandalf, Saruman, and Radagast, and then there were four others who went east and went south, and we never hear of them again.
No, just two others. The blue wizards, the two blue wizards.
There were just two of them? I thought there were four. All right.
No, they're just two.
You know what their favorite song was?
Why'd Saruman leave us?
No, am I blue? Of course, they also liked Blues of the Night. She wore blue velvet.
Is that what he
Call me
meant by
Mr.
blue
Blue.
wizards? Did he mean they're sad wizards?
Yeah, they're very sad.
He didn't
They were
mean
sad.
color. He was just meaning
No.
they're very
It was-
sad.
They're very sad. They're blue.
That's why they went east, because they're
That's right.
sad.
Well, I mean, you go to the Slavic countries, people are sad a lot. So they're just, they're
That
there
was
with the
his.
Easterlings.
That was his logic.
That's my logic. They're there drinking proto vodka. Oh, it's all awful. Oh. Anyhow, so what should happen then? But that when our revolution broke out, it was essentially the little oligarchies in each colony reaching for complete power, which they attained in the end. But they did so in tandem with the Whig oligarchy, the big one in England. You see, in 1770, King George had assembled a majority in the House of Commons, and he had a prime minister who would represent him exactly as he wished to be, and that was Lord North. So from then on, things really, really heated up. But here's the fun part, the money quote, if you will. General Howe, who after Gage was replaced, commanded in the Northeast. General Howe, 3 or 4 times, allowed General Washington's army to escape.
Mm-hmm.
After he retired, he went back to London and took up his place in Parliament with the opposition to the king. He faced a parliamentary board of inquiry, and they said, "Why did you do that?" And his response was, "The answer to that question is political, and I choose not to give it." Well, you see, it was more important for Howe and his kind that Britain be defeated than even lose the colonies, if it meant that the king's attempt at reforming the Constitution would be squelched.
How treasonous.
It was, actually. But there was no one to enforce it. The king was not in a position to stop it. So Lord North's government fell in 1780 or 81. And from that time on, he gave up trying to fight the oligarchy. No, except in very small areas, no British sovereign since has attempted to do so.
And then he went crazy.
Well, that came a lot later.
But he still then went crazy.
20 years later.
But that probably didn't help, though, right?
He wasn't crazy during the revolution. Actually, his craziness was a physical ailment, porphyria.
Yeah. Yeah. I watched the Madness of King George III recently.
No, it was the Madness of King George.
Oh, whatever.
No, this is important. The play.
Wait, why is it?
I'm going to explain why it's important. It has to do with the intelligence of the average American. The title of the play was The Madness of George III. Okay. They were going to make a movie. They were afraid that the average American would look at it and think it was a sequel to films they hadn't seen. The Madness of George III. Well, I didn't see 1 and 2. So that's why they changed the name to The Madness of King George. That is a true story.
That's terrible.
It's true.
That's so bad.
But it's true. It's both true that they did it and true that they were right to be afraid.
Oh yes, that is very concerning.
What? That we're not very smart people? We have let me tell you something. We don't need brains. We have a lot of other virtues.
We have Netflix.
Well, we have don't just have Netflix. We're we're a very generous people. Oh gosh, yes. I tell people that if you want to, foreigners, I mean, that if you want to hate my country, that is the United States, study our foreign policy, its history. You'll end up hating the United States. If you want to love the United States, come over here, or I should say come over there, I guess, and take a long road trip. You'll fall in love. You'll meet very nice people. You'll see beautiful places. You'll think it's great.
Just stay away from Seattle or Portland.
Well, there are some danger zones. Although knowing both those cities as they are, I would not be afraid to go into them. It's
Fine.
just that what's that?
Fine.
No, I wouldn't be afraid to go into them. It's just I do so at the right time, and I do so at the right speed.
Yeah, but you're smart.
Well, there's that.
You're expecting people to be smart and to go into these places thinking?
I don't get it. I got into Seattle at 4 a.m. And the minute I got to my hotel, they stole my car. How did that happen? I don't get it. I left it outside for just 20 minutes, and I came back and it was gone. Well, sir, you really should have got into the hotel parking structure. You really shouldn't have put it out on the street like that. Well, why not? Well, you ever see a movie called Gone in 60 Seconds? No? Well, that's part of your problem. A really good strip crew can work a car in 60 seconds. But I digress.
Let's get back to
Yeah. The important point here, and there is one.
wait,
is
there was a point?
not with that, but there's an important point as regards the question of the crown and the role of the United States in producing what the British monarchy is now. So his defeat in the revolution destroyed George III's attempts to reform the Constitution of Britain. Then, as you know, a few years later, because we were a little bit chaotic, we had the Constitutional Convention and drew up our Constitution. Now, the role of the president was based very much on the way the founding fathers thought the king operated. And this was kind of ironic in and of itself, of course, because he didn't have the kind of power that they gave the president. Before 1688 he had.
Yeah.
And of course, the other irony is that if we had an hereditary monarch with the powers given him in the Constitution, I guarantee you, precisely because he was hereditary, people would not allow him to exercise any power beyond what was specifically given him. Whereas today, because the president's elected, we give him all power under heaven and earth. He's one of us, and we vote for him.
Well, but what about the bureaucracy? They have more power than anyone.
Well, indeed, and the Supreme Court. But I digress.
Well, but only if you like their decision.
Yeah. Well, indeed. You know, my favorite candidate for the Supreme Court was a lady you've never heard of.
Interesting.
Diana Ross.
Because the Supremes.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Miss Diana Ross, Supremes. And I think she would be great as Chief Justice of the United States. I know what her first injunction would be.
What?
Stop in the name of love. I can just see it. Anyhow, so when the smoke cleared, the Constitution was written in America. It was Eric Nelson in his very good book, The Royalist Revolution, who made an important point. He said, on one side of the water, you would have a monarchy without a king, and on the other, a king without a monarchy. And that's what we've had ever since.
Indeed. And so what was your opinion of how Princess Margaret was portrayed? She's always the rebellious in the show. She's a rebellious. She wants to marry a divorcee and that sort of thing.
All that. Yeah, well, there's a lot of truth to that. And when she didn't get what she wanted, she led kind of a semi-scandalous lifestyle.
Yeah.
Very sad,
seems like
very sad woman.
The Brits really want to marry divorcees. It's a strange thing to me.
Well, it's not that they're Brits; it's the upper classes. I mean, you look at
Sorry.
the upper classes in every country, and their marriage rates have, that's the whole story in itself. You
Yeah.
take any. Well, let me see. Hold on. Let me see if I can come up with a figure, a society figure. Well, Nelson Rockefeller. Okay, Nelson Rockefeller was the governor of New York when I was a boy, but he came from a wealthy WASP family, oddly enough, called the Rockefellers.
It was shocking.
Well, they have the same last name. So the thing about him is that he, it says on March 23rd, 1930, Rockefeller married Mary Todd Hunter Clark. They had 5 children. Nelson and Mary Rockefeller were divorced in 1962. Okay, after 22 years of marriage. On May 4th, 1963, Rockefeller married Margaretta Happy Fittler. They had 2 sons. So his first wife was born in 1907. His second wife was born in 1926. Now, let me see what does it tell us about his kids. The in American society, as in the upper classes around the globe these days, divorce has become far more common than staying together. So let's see. His oldest son, Rodman Rockefeller, married Barbara Ann Olson in 1953. They had 4 children. That marriage ended in divorce in 1979. And he married the former Alexander von Metzler in 1980. Let's see.
Makes me think of the Beach Boys. Barbara Ann.
Barbara Ann. Barbara. But let me see. Then his son, Stephen Clark Rockefeller, he in 1959, he married Anne Marie Rasmussen in Sonia, Norway. She was a former employee of the Rockefeller household. The couple had 3 children before divorcing. Rockefeller remarried and had 1 child before that marriage ended in divorce. He then wed Barbara Bellows on May 11th, 1991. Okay, are you seeing a pattern here?
Yes, so much divorce after would it be no fault divorce, or was there a fault divorce? Did you need a fault?
Both.
What do you mean?
I mean, there were both. They had both kinds. I mean, the divorce rate has continued steadily.
When did no fault divorce come into effect?
It depends on the state. In California, it was in the 70s.
Okay.
So then his younger son from the second wife, Mark Rockefeller, in 1998, Rockefeller married Renee Ann Anisco, born in 1968, the Church of the Magdalene in Pocatello Hills. They have 4 children, divorced in 2020.
Oh, so everyone's divorced.
Well, let's see. Let's go to Jackie Kennedy. Jackie Kennedy Onassis. Now, of course, she was a good Catholic. Okay. So she was born to Black Jack Bouvier, who here we go. He married Janet Norton Lee, daughter of James T. Lee. They had 2 daughters, Jackie Bouvier Kennedy and Carolyn Lee Bouvier. Bouvier's drinking, gambling, and philandering led to the couple's divorce in June 1940. He never remarried. However, his wife, Janet Lee Bouvier, Jackie's mother, married Hugh Dudley Auchincloss Jr.
Those women.
But wait, it gets better because Hugh Dudley Auchincloss, he was married 3 times and had 5 children. His first marriage was on June 4th, 1925, to Maya Nekrapovitsky, a Russian noblewoman. Before their divorce in 1932, they had 1 daughter together. Yusha Auchincloss III died in 2015. In 1935, he married Nina S. Vidal, the only daughter of Senator Thomas Gore. Nina had been previously married to Eugene Vidal, a Roosevelt appointee, and with him had Gore Vidal, the author. Before their divorce in 1941, they had 2 children, Nina Gore Auchincloss and Thomas Gore Auchincloss. And then they got divorced, so on June 21st, 1942, he married for the 3rd and final time to Janet Lee Bouvier, mother of Jacqueline Kennedy and Assis and Lee Radziwill. They remained married until his death in 1976 and had 2 children together, which is why Gore Vidal always made a point that he was Jackie Kennedy's stepbrother because they had the same stepfather.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, I mention this not simply to rake up old scandals, but that's very typical of what American high society had become. And that's what the British ruling classes and the French and the Germans and the Italians and everybody and their brother have become. And mind you, it's even truer in the political classes. Even our only been married once. That's something.
Hold on a second. Internet being silly. Yep. Okay. Continue.
Even our president, for all that he's senile, only got married once.
Wait. I thought somebody was a step. I thought Jill Biden was. Is Jill Biden his only wife?
I think so.
I thought.
Unless he was a widower. Let me see. I could be wrong.
I thought because I thought I thought Hunter wasn't Jill's son.
Oh, poor Joe. What a loss that would be. Boy, not being a blood relation of Hunter Biden. I've had to deal with that my entire life. All right, let's see.
I could be wrong. I just thought that's what they were saying.
Well, his wife and daughter died. Yeah, he was a widower.
Oh,
His
okay.
wife and daughter were killed in a car accident. Their sons, Bo and Hunter, who was 2, were taken to the hospital.
Wow.
Bo with a broken leg and Hunter with a minor skull fracture.
I bet Joe had nothing to do with the accident.
No, he didn't. He years later,
Oh,
he
okay.
believed the truck driver who had been drinking before the crash was never charged, and the driver's family said the deaths haunted him until he died in 1999. So that was in 72 when his wife died. And then in 1975, he met teacher Jill Tracy Jacobs in 1975 on a blind date. They spent their honeymoon in Hungary, which was a communist country back then. They married at the United Nations Chapel in New York. Interesting. They didn't have a Catholic wedding, I guess.
Interesting. Wait, so isn't there a penalty if you don't marry? Well, I guess he could have gotten dispensation.
He could have gotten a dispensation. Their regular church is called St. Joseph's on the Brandywine. Parish of the Roman Catholic Church, blah blah blah, and it's Joe Biden's parish. So that's
Wonderful.
beautiful. Yeah.
Wonderful. Great story. Story time with Charles. It's great.
Well, indeed. Political story time with Charles.
Political marriages, divorces, and death with Charles.
Well, I mean, when you look and you see all the divorces in the upper classes across the globe, that might also explain part of the reason we are where we are.
Yep, I agree. Wait, so I think we should close out with, why did you stop watching after the first season?
I was convinced that the inaccuracies would only multiply. And I
Okay.
had a lot of other. I was convinced that the inaccuracies would only multiply, and I had a lot of other stuff to do.
And you weren't bored.
Well, no, I wasn't bored. I'm never bored. I've got too much stuff going on all the time.
Perfect.
I mean, one of the things I do are these odd podcasts with people who are like, if I've met them at all, maybe once. You know what I'm saying? And yet they ask me questions. Well, no, I mean, it takes some time, and I'm happy. I would rather spend my time on podcasts than watching Netflix.
Okay.
I'm
Sounds
sorry,
good.
it's just the way I feel. I took a stab at watching their series 1999, or sorry, 1899.
What's it about?
Oh, it's about 8 episodes too long. Basically, these people are on a very strange ship in the year 1899, and things get increasingly weird. But it took kind of a, shall we say, perverse turn in the third show, and I just stopped watching. I mean, I can take a certain amount of 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 implying something.
Mm-hmm.
When you start waving it in my face, that's that's when I close you down.
Yeah. Makes sense. Okay.
That's so I'm afraid whatever happens to the hapless passengers on the ship Kerberos, supposedly in the year 1899, they're going to have to solve it without my help.
To be honest, I don't think they were looking for your help.
No, and that's good because they ain't gonna get it. They
But
get
okay.
nothing from me. They could call me on the ship's radio, and I would respond, "You guys are too weird for my taste. Go away."
Go away. Okay. Well, thank you, Charles, for coming on and informing us on the historicity of the crown, as well as giving us a great historical context of, sort of the background of the British monarchy. Anything you'd like to promote? Anything that's coming up? Anything people should look out for?
Well, my new series on Virgin Most Powerful Radio, which is entitled "The Never Ending Struggle," my ongoing show on Tumblr House YouTube channel, which is called Off the Menu. My latest book, of course, is Blessed Charles of Austria: The Legacy of a Holy Emperor. You can catch my stuff at Catholicism.org, at the European Conservative, at 1 Peter 5, and at Crisis. Although I've not written anything for a month since I took ill. So I've really got to pull myself together and start cranking it out again. But there's one other point I want to make about the British monarchy, though. You might very well ask, well, if they have no power, what good is it? And I think that's a fair question. Well, apart from the fact that you have scumbags like President Blair sitting in Buckingham Palace, which would be bad enough. Beyond that, isn't it interesting that after the Queen died, not just in Britain, but across the Commonwealth realms, Canada and Australia and New Zealand, all of these politicians who, many of whom are either or both atheists or Republicans with a small r, suddenly wrap themselves in the panoply of royalty, invoked Almighty God, invoked Almighty God's blessings on the king. I mean, it was all, and in towns all across those areas, they had these the reading of the accession proclamation, which varied from place to place. But I think it's worth reading simply because, again, you know very well that a lot of the people who were doing it really didn't believe what was said. Nevertheless, this was the text of the accession proclamation. And by the way, if you go to YouTube, you will see, not YouTube, sorry, the Wikipedia, and look up Proclamation of Accession of Charles III, you will see all the different texts that we used across the Commonwealth. It really, it in itself, it's kind of telling. But this was the one that was used across Britain. And again, if you can imagine people standing there solemnly, half of whom either didn't believe in God or the monarchy, or both, but nevertheless. Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles, Philip, Arthur, George. We therefore, the lords spiritual and temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London, and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless his majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. Given at St. James's Palace this 10th day of September in the year of our Lord 2022. God save the king.
Hear, hear.
Well, isn't that stirring?
Mm-hmm. Especially the recognition of where authority comes from.
Yeah. Then that just, but it means as much there as our Constitution means in America.
So nothing. It's ceremonial at best.
Listen, smart guy, do you know what the bailiff says every morning that the Supreme Court is in session?
Why am I here?
No. He says,
Sorry,
all
that's what
rise.
Biden says.
Well, all rise. The Supreme Court is now in session. The Honorable Chief Justice, whatever, presiding.
Roberts.
Whoever. God save the United States and this honorable court. Isn't that impressive?
We need some saving.
Yes, but it means as much as, the Supreme Court, after all, are the ones who banned the Ten Commandments of any other court save their own.
Well, you never know what the Supreme Court's going to do next.
No, you never do.
They do as they feel. However they feel, we must feel because they are our betters.
Well, that's true. I wonder if Mr. Chief Justice Roberts is divorced.
I don't think so.
That'd be fun, though. Let's see.
That would be fun.
Well,
what would be fun?
interesting. I meant interesting. I didn't mean fun.
That would be fun.
I couldn't mean that. No, you know what? Let's see. He's got 2 kids, but the question is, where did they come from and why?
Where did they come from and why? I think Charles
That's
needs
right.
a little bit of biological education.
Well, no, you know what? He and his wife were married July 27th, 1996. She's a lawyer. They have 2 adopted children. So
I get it.
Yeah. The
No divorce.
no divorce.
Yeah, I think our Supreme Court justices are a little more on the up and up in that way,
Well, let's see.
because there can be I don't know. There's probably less pressure in some ways.
Ah, but Sonia Sotomayor, she was married in 1976 to one Kevin Noonan and was divorced in 1983.
Yeah, but she doesn't exist, so
What are you talking about? Of course she exists.
I don't recognize her existence.
You don't have a choice. She's a wonderful person. Oh, they divorced amicably. That's nice.
But she's a cultural Catholic, so
Yeah, well,
which
the cultural Catholics are the ones who get the jobs for the
they
most
should just
part. Usually,
isn't that cultural appropriation, Charles?
it is, but we would have to have a pope and/or bishops who were willing to say something about it.
Yeah. Anyways, we ended the show a little bit ago, but we haven't ended the show.
All right. Well,
thank you
let
all
me
for
say,
watching.
let me say goodbye, everyone. Have a good day, and remember to listen to Connor every single week.
Thank
If you
you,
miss
Charles.
a single show, you may miss something vital to your future and that of our nation.
That might be giving me too much credit. But thank you, everyone. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, join our Discord channel to continue the conversation outside of YouTube. And you can also follow me on Twitter. I'll have my and I will have the links in the description for Charles and where you can find his work. Anyways, thank you all for watching and have a blessed day. Bye.